Hello and welcome to Data Planet. I'm Emma Davis, and today's guest is Timothy Calder, Director of Global Event Marketing at Achievers. Welcome to the show, Timothy.
Thanks for having me on, Emma.
So, to start, tell me about Achievers. What is it that you guys do?
So we're an employee recognition company. We're a way to empower employees to send recognitions to each other every day through the flow of work, as well as if managers want to recognize certain behaviors to drive repetition, we have a reward system as part of that program as well.
Okay, and so what kinds of behaviors and recognition? Is it as simple as, a gold star, a monetary bonus, a gift card? Like what are those
It can be
recognitions like?
any one of those things. So, for example, if you were running a healthcare company, running a hand washing campaign and wanted to ensure that people were washing their hands in the hospital, you can do a campaign to drive that specific behavior. You can encourage, run pride campaigns and acknowledge the work of LGBTQ plus employees. You can do all sorts of programs that drive the sorts of behavior you want to see across your employee populations, and that can be people who work in office, but as well as people who are offline employees that are, in a manufacturing plant or those types of environments.
Okay, very cool. And so, as the Director of Global Event Marketing, Um, I have to bring up to you my like shameful marketing moment, I guess, which is anytime anyone knows I'm in marketing and they are investing a significant amount in events, they ask me, is it worth it? Like they don't know what they're getting from their event spend. They know it's expensive, both in terms of money and in terms of time and, the preparation and exposure. It feels embarrassing if you did all that and it wasn't worth it. And so, um, when I get that question, I don't know. Like I can tell you, I can answer those questions on the paid digital side and I can tell you what's working for you on paid digital. And, to me, that's a science, and events is more of a crapshoot. And even, what you get out of an event, well, maybe that was being influenced by other channels. Maybe it was, it's not even worth it. But in talking with you, you have this, events as a science approach to event marketing. So can you talk a little bit about your measures of success for event marketing at Achievers?
Absolutely. Events are complicated, and as you say, they can be expensive, and showing the ROI to secure the investment of a CMO or CEO can be challenging. And what I've focused on in my career is really ensuring that I'm collecting the data in such a way that I'm able to show very clearly, if you put in this much amount of money into an events program, this is the level of pipeline that you're going to generate out of the experience, and also work towards closed deals. So if we think of an investment like a major trade show, it's really important to understand there's multiple ways that you can show return for that event. Some of them are more clearly measurable to pipeline outcomes and others are more subtle. So for example, part of it is brand. Do people recognize your company? Do they remember it afterwards? How do you make them feel during the experience itself? But there also is the scans that you're making at the booth, and it's more important not only to collect the data of who's come by your booth so that you can add them to nurture campaigns and market to that audience, but are you booking meetings in the moment so that you can follow up with sales so that then you can show pipeline? And so being able to show back to your business of here's the volume of people who came by the booth, which is almost a vanity metric at this point. Then to narrow it down to here are the clients that we met with. Here are the deals or opportunities that were either opened or furthered as a result of this conversation. How does it relate? Because, marketing is complex, and especially as you're, work with larger and larger clients, you're dealing with a large buyer committee. So the event is never you can't really walk into a sales meeting and then say, you know, we're responsible for this deal. It's much more complicated than that. But you also want to create opportunities for your sales reps and leaders to know and to share back their stories of who they met at an event, how it impacted a deal, so that not only can you show what you can show on the dashboard, but you're also collecting the narrative so that when you're in that QBR or when you're in that annual review, you can tell a narrative of, such and such account came by our booth, this person disclosed this new person on the buying committee that we weren't aware of. This is the impact that had on a on an opportunity, those don't necessarily all translate to just an immediate dashboard, but you need to collect the data and the stories in such a way that that you can show that you're moving that business along, and at the same time you need to show a responsibility when they're investing in a an event. They're making a choice between, do I invest in digital, do I invest in partner marketing, do I invest in events, and you're trying to tell that organization and tell that leader that you're the best bet, that in this
Mm,
circumstance, in this quarter, given the amount of money you're asking for, this is where we should be. So you have a responsibility to ensure that you're able to report that back. And, I had a boss who back in the day, she said, in the early 90s when she was planning events, the measure she'd come back to sales with was how many wine bottles they used at an experience. And from a data perspective, we've moved well beyond that, and the expectation is far beyond that. So that's
yeah.
where I focus.
Yeah. What you're talking about is fairly focused on i- clarity and communication and prioritization within the marketing team and prioritization and allocation of marketing resources. But it sounds like but in order to do that, what you're actually doing is making sure uh your conversations again, you're not just, I got this many visitors to the table, not even I got this many leads, but actually, some accountability to what did that do to help move pipeline along or create new pipeline. Um, and really, comes from an awareness like that's why we're here. That's what matters is are we helping to support, existing deals that are in pipeline, help to, continue to influence those, start net new conversations, and then make a really good clean handoff to sales team or whoever's going to be carrying that conversation on from there to make that you know to make that journey through to conversion and ultimately closing the deal as smooth as possible because your job is not just like I got you the lead, here you go, but you have a vested interest in like don't mess this up. I worked really hard to connect these dots and make this a good handoff for you. um so how are you making sure that that happens, that it isn't just about collecting those data points to hand over but actually like
So there's
make this
there's
work?
there's a couple of points to that, and it's one of the reasons that as an event marketer, I'm really tightly aligned with my marketing operations team. And so one is having an event tech stack that you use consistently. So we have a landing page system. We happen to be using Splash that's owned by Cvent now. So that any event that we are running ourselves, we're collecting information in a consistent way. And it's not just somebody collecting a list on an Excel sheet or some of the freemium tools that are available online, but we've got it connected so that we can scale it up and the data flows in a consistent way when somebody registers for an event. But even when we're on-site an event, in the last year, universal badge scanning has become a major trend within the event industry, and there's a lot that are popping up onto the market, and we've selected a tool. But it's the ability that no matter what show you go up to, you can now scan a badge, and it will immediately go into your marketing automation system as well as your CRM, rather than waiting to get a list upload the following day. But it also empowers when I pitched it to our sales team at our SKO, I'm like, we're finally giving you the power of marketing in your hand at events. You can scan a person immediately. It will collect their contact information. It gives you the ability to write in notes and answer key qualifying questions in the moment.
Mhm,
That helps with the handoff for the people post event, of whether, the context of what this conversation was. Is this a high quality lead? Is this person going to introduce you to somebody else? It also allows reps to email them in that moment. So if there's a field event where we have one or two seats that we still need to fill, you can fill with that last minute person. And one of the challenges that we're working through now as we launch the tool is it's increased our speed to lead. So the moment that we're scanning people in a booth while we're at the event, our SDRs who are local are getting qualified leads from that event. And for the first time in my career, we're actually having to tell SDRs, please pause.
mm,
Don't actually follow up with this lead until Monday when people get back with the event. we'll provide them immediate information through an automated email or any other like now that they're directly in our marketing automation system, we can trigger certain campaigns during the conference that makes sense that if you're, people are in keynotes and they get bored and they open their phone and they open their email. So you do want to send them some material, but you don't want to say like, let's have a phone call or let's do a thing when they're at this experience. So it's an interesting coaching that I'm having to do for the first time, which is okay, how do we slow down the process on the SDR side for the first time? But then there's also the human element of it, which is working with your sales enablement team, working with your pre-event, know before you go planning session, where
Mhm.
you're coaching people on how to use the tool, what information is valuable in the notes section, what we expect you to collect while you're talking to a person, acknowledging that if you're an SDR on the phone all day calling people down, the way you conduct one of those phone conversations is different when you're face to face. You
Mhm.
don't always get that opportunity to like ask the 10 qualifying questions while you're speaking to a human. It doesn't feel like a human conversation or an emotionally responsible conversation. So how do you gather that information and collect it in the moment? What are the requirements for that? And then holding them accountable on site before the end of the show. We will pull up the list of leads we collected, look at the notes, and see who collected something that may not have, in the moment, perhaps they didn't have the ability to share the entire insights that they got from that conversation, making sure that we capture that, having a plan for how you hand off that lead to the person who potentially owns that account going forward. So making sure that, are you going to do the first introduction and say, hi, I'm Leanne. I met you on site. But you're going to be working with Barry going forward. But here's that, personal handoff email. Or are you sending a back end Teams message that's like, here's the context for this. I didn't necessarily put in the CRM for whatever reason, but I need you to know this so that when you follow up, you can reference it or send a gifting campaign that's related to this insight about this person that then captures their attention. So that's, even though I'm very data focused, there still is a human element to everything that we do in the events experience. And so you have to manage that aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having so much fun listening to you talk about this, like, accountability framework. It's such incredible teamwork in the way that's like, we are setting this standard and we are all working towards the same thing even though we're, operating in these different functions. We have the same end goal in mind, and so here's the part that you're gonna play in getting there, and I imagine that helps to reduce the sort of classic friction between marketing and sales also of like, well, these leads are garbage or like, cool, what do I do with this? And, that I mean, not that that ever happens, but um
Happens all the time, and get that feedback myself occasionally. Nothing operates perfectly, and that tension will always exist. There are reps who are more amenable to being team players and have a longer term vision, and maybe they aspire for a leadership role, and so they want to be seen in that way. But you also work with sales leaders that are like I'm here to work my accounts. I'm an enterprise rep. They're extremely focused. They will work, extremely diligent on the accounts that are within their patch, but they're not as generous as we would like them to be. So, that's also one of the accountability metrics when I'm working with my sales leaders is how did an account executive or an SDR or a CS, a customer success executive perform on site? Were they team players? Are they somebody that we should have at a future event? Because you
mm,
do want to make sure that not only are you sending over your best players or perhaps the people who might own some of the really important accounts, but you need to make sure that your team is balanced in a mix between some of perhaps those higher performers that may be a little bit more self-interested versus who's going to actually execute on the strategy. Because I've had this scenario happen where we've, sent a rep out to an activity and their accounts didn't happen to be there and they weren't generous with how they worked the other people at that experience. And then when you have the ROI conversation of, uh, you know, did this show value? You're not able to show it. And, what I've been at an organization for a very long time. And so I understand and have an in depth knowledge of the story behind the dashboard. I understand why some events performed and some events didn't. But the reality is, when you're working with leaders that may only be looking at data, they don't
mhm.
necessarily have that historical context. They just see you held an event in XYZ city. it cost this much and it didn't perform. They don't have the narrative. Well, we had a rep who wound up leaving the organization 2 months later. We didn't know that they were, emotionally no longer invested in the organization, and they didn't execute the way that we would have had them. Otherwise, we still suspect this event would have worked. When you
Mhm.
only look at the data, sometimes it's like, well, the math doesn't work and we shouldn't do that again. That can be a challenge.
That's I mean, your holistic approach in this whole conversation is what I'm finding most compelling, and I think is what makes any specialized marketing function work well, is this awareness of how does this interact with other players, and, what are the functional aspects, the data aspects, the people aspects, and how all those fit together. Um, one question I had about the sort of in-event marketing nurture. So you mentioned sometimes it makes sense for, that connection. Hey, let's hold off on having any SDRs talk to these people, or A's talk to these people, because maybe the context is weird. Like, we're still in the event. We have something that's going to feel more right to them or feel more relevant to them because we designed it for this event. Are you doing that? You're designing like individual nurture flows specific to that event so that it feels like, oh, this is part of the conversation I'm having here. This is part of what I'm experiencing right now, rather than being like, whoa, where this is like too much context switching from what I'm in right now. Are you designing an entire suite of outreach for those events?
We are both pre-event and during the event itself. And depending on the lead source or the activation on site, some of them are intentional because we think we're going to get a meeting or generate pipeline in the short term. And others are done because we are long-term partners of this conference or this experience. And we believe that by building our awareness within that audience, that we will be served well in future years. So when you're thinking holistically about the experience, every event stands alone as an individual activity, but I like, when I'm developing my event strategy, I like working with partners multiple times. I like, putting together packages of what we're going to do at an event. And this is the way that our brand shows up at an event. So, if you're doing a major trade show, that means what is the size and quality of the booth experience that you're going to have at that event? And some of that activation is a demo booth where you expect to generate pipeline or have meetings. But some of the footprint of that booth is also, just glitter and sparkle of just how do you attract people to just walk into your booth and see something new and fun. And we've had the experience of a automated cotton candy machine, or we're currently doing achievers varsity jackets for our customers that you can have customized within the context of the booth. Some people will just come in just to see that happening. Some people will come in to redeem the booth. Are those people necessarily going to turn into the pipeline immediately? Not necessarily. And so as you create individual campaigns to track where did you interact with that individual, um, you know, uh, for example, there's drink and food activations that you do many times to drive attendance at your booth, and they're highly performing. And you work with the event vendor, and they organize a station within your booth, and you'll get a lot of traffic. Some of those people you'll nurture within the booth experience to get them a demo. Some people are there for the booze. And those aren't people that you necessarily want to send to sales. And so that's where, working with your marketing operations person on the lead scoring, well, if they happen to be the right buyer and they just, weren't paying attention in that moment, you may still want to send them over to an SDR if they're the right title at the right account. Like, hey, they were at this conference, they were trying
Mhm.
to solve a problem. Maybe we didn't get to engage them in the way that we would have preferred, but we should probably have a touch point. But at the same time, I'm thinking long term, and then moving those people that perhaps were at the drink station or at an activation station and nurturing those through our webinar program or our field program throughout the year, not having our SDRs follow up immediately and having them scored slightly lower or slightly different. And so you can take that approach. But then when you're doing a multi year investment, you start to see the return of that, because we see a lot of trade show leads will convert within 3 months or 6 months post event because they participated in our webinar program, had time to become more educated about the product and engage later within
Mhm.
the context of the year. And so, within my global program, I'm fortunate in that I own our webinar program, our trade show program, our field program. I have really tight alignment with our partner program, which does include events. And I currently, this year, I've started to take responsibility for our customer marketing. And so because I have that fulsome view of like, how are these leads working both at the prospect level and how are these different activations working and interacting? How is that data going? And then from an SDR perspective, it's how is the information from all of these sources being presented so it's consistent across all of these programs so that an SDR knows where to look to find where are the notes, where's the campaign history to know what I did with this person, what's the recommended message based on what they did at this event for me to like reach out to.
Mhm.
And that's been very manual up to this point of like having regular meetings, documenting everything, having a single source of truth where SDRs are going to look. With AI in the last 6 months, now it's about making sure that data is stored in such a way that the AI can read it and the
Mhm.
AI can present that info within the tools that an SDR has access to. And it'll actually tell a narrative based off of those touch points, those notes, that context that's, hands above what we would ever be able to do from that. When it's very manual, some of the challenges is did the SDR put it in the right campaign to follow up? Like sometimes they get confused or they see multiple campaigns and they send, no, they send a message, but it's not necessarily the ideal message based on what that person did or how you interacted. And now with AI, not only are they getting that greater level of context of what does this lead, what did they do, what other touch points have they had outside of my own program? Have they been touching digital ads? Have they been doing they can now get a little write up that's like, this is what this looks like. And that write up now informs the first email within the sequence of their outreach sequence to reach out to a person that you're now, not only are you gaining the context of what we know at them through marketing data that we have within our database, but also what is that AI pulling from the general knowledge of people on the internet. And you're seeing like we're seeing a significant, I can't disclose the exact number. I was in a meeting last week, but like a significant improvement, like not marginal, like significant on the responsive rate to the first email that people get, because now not only are they correctly being identified of what we know about them, but also, what does their company website say their problems are, what their priorities are, and how do you reference that again against the product that we're offering? And it just makes for a much more cleaner experience that like we saw you, we heard you, and we're responding in kind.
Timothy, you shared so much today about what a successful events program looks like and a data driven events program. I think the concepts are actually pretty straightforward. Like what's at the heart of this, it's alignment, it's clarity on the goal and the outcome you care about. But the infrastructure, all the pieces that actually go into making that happen, it's not easy. It's very complicated. Um, and so for me in my future conversations with people asking me about like how do I do data driven events and how do I, make sure events are worthwhile, can you briefly give a recommendation on like where would you even begin? Where do you start if you have been doing events? You have the infrastructure for like I know how to get a booth set up, I know how to get where my audience is and all that, but I just don't know how to answer that question when my CMO or CFO asks like what's the point of doing this? Where would you start?
It's been a while since I started. I've been here 8 years. It's been an ongoing project, but where if I were to start fresh again, having those conversations with SDR leadership and actual SDRs of okay, what's the data and information that you need in order to work a lead well? So, that's contact information, phone number, email, some of the basics, but also where do you want the contextual information of where was this lead source? What was the context of it? And then making sure that I'm working with my ops team to select event tech tools
Hmm.
that can find that data and connect in and integrate in with the software and the tools that sales team is using, so that there's a consistent flow of information. And so that's kind of like at the very basic of just collecting the data in such a way that the end user can action it in a
Hmm.
timely and efficient manner, and that the way that you're collecting data, working with your rev ops team or your data analytics team to understand how a functional dashboard works. Whereas, we're a Salesforce, unit. How does this dashboard actually function? What you know, is there a time period restriction on when an MQL is considered value or sourced? What's sourced by sales versus what's sourced by marketing?
Hmm.
How do
Hmm.
I, with the tools that I have within my wheelhouse as a marketer, can I make sure that I can keep my end of the dashboard green? And that actually informs strategy and what events you might go to or why you where you prioritize budget. That, there can be a balance. Some of this, one of the challenges that I always have when the context of budgeting are there are certain activities that you take on because they perform cleanly with the dashboard, right? They're
Mhm.
going to show the business that I'm showing the ROI, the dashboard's going to go green. When the leadership team creates a slide for the board, it looks like the events have a direct impact, right? But there's also within the mix, I do have to reserve budget for those things that are right for the business that I know are strategically correct, that will help us progress opportunities. But due to the nature of the way either that event works or the way that data might flow or just the volume of people, some executive programs, you might be doing a dinner with only 10 people.
Mhm.
That's the odds of that moving the needle huge is it's hard. You have to be really precise with every action against every individual, but it's still worthwhile for the investment. It does help the opportunity sale. It develops trust with the sale leadership because they are now getting access to the senior decision makers within an account. But then you balance how much you can do that kind of activity, because if you only do that kind of activity, you're going to be seen as a very expensive channel and you're not going to show that dashboard green. So you have to balance off the mix of like, all right, this is what's going to make things green versus here's the other activities that I know will add value. And then there's also there are requests that come in from leaders or other departments or other stakeholders that are like, okay, in order to maintain that relationship or build that relationship, I'll find funding for that activity. But I know it's not necessarily gonna show the return in the same way that some of the other activities that I do, but then you have to have enough of that budget within your scheme, but not at the same time, you need to say no to certain activities, but you have to find that right balance.
Amazing. Timothy, I've appreciated so much the insights you shared. I found this conversation fascinating and just feel like I've found an events channel kindred spirit in terms of the results and data driven approach to all of this. I love this conversation. Listeners, if you want to learn more about Timothy and Achievers, details will be in the show notes. Otherwise, Timothy, thank you so much for joining me today on Data Planet.
Thank you for having me on the program.